The air shimmered with an unnatural stillness, an eerie silence pressing against the thick, gnarled trees that bordered the dwarven village of Ironvale. Tucked deep in the mountains, Ironvale had long remained untouched by the chaos of the outside world, its people content in their craft and customs. But tonight, something was wrong. Gunnar Stonefoot, a stout dwarf with a braided silver beard, was the first to sense it. He had been sharpening his axe by the fire when a cold gust snuffed out the flames, plunging his cozy cottage into darkness. The warmth fled from the room as if a great shadow had swallowed it whole. Gunnar stood, heart hammering in his chest. He had seen many things in his years, a goblin raid, an avalanche that nearly wiped out his kin, but this was different. This was something old, something watching. A scream shattered the quiet. Gunnar bolted outside, his boots crunching on the frost-kissed dirt. The village square, normally bustling with merriment and the clinking of ale mugs, was now drenched in an unnatural twilight. Torches sputtered and dimmed, their flames retreating from the cold that gnawed at the air. And then he saw her. Little Elira, the blacksmith's daughter, barely 7 summers old, stood at the center of the square, her tiny hands stretched toward the sky. Her bright red curls whipped in the wind, her nightgown billowing like a ghost's veil. Above her, something dark spiraled, a gaping void in the shape of a doorway, edges rippling like ink dropped in water. It pulsed, and from its depths, a clawed hand slithered outward. Gunnar didn't think. He lunged, yanking Elira back just as the hand snapped shut where she had been standing. She shrieked in terror, clutching his tunic as the darkness coiled around itself. The ground trembled beneath them. Villagers poured out of their homes, gasping in horror. The portal shimmered, and from its depths, a whispering voice curled into the air like smoke. "The child is ours." Gunnar's grip on Elira tightened. He turned to the gathered dwarfs, their stout forms rigid with fear. "What dark magic is this?" he demanded. No one spoke. No one dared move. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the portal collapsed, vanishing into nothingness. A shuddering silence followed, broken only by Elira's quiet sobs against Gunnar's chest. The village elder, Balgrin, stepped forward, his wrinkled face grim. "That was no ordinary darkness," he murmured. "Something ancient has awakened." Gunnar met his gaze. "Then we must stop it." Balgrin hesitated before nodding. "Aye. But this is beyond the strength of our axes. We need a guide. Someone who knows the dark." Gunnar frowned. There were few in the village who dabbled in such things. Dwarfs were creatures of stone and fire, not shadows. But then his stomach sank. There was one. The old witch. The path to Grelda's hut was seldom traveled, and for good reason. The crone had lived on the outskirts of Ironvale for longer than anyone could remember. Some claimed she had dwarven blood, others whispered she was something else entirely. No one knew for certain, but all agreed she was not to be trusted. Gunnar carried Elira in one arm, his axe in the other. The child had fallen into a fitful sleep, her small face pale against his shoulder. The trees grew denser, their branches clawing at the sky. The further he walked, the more the world seemed to shift. Shadows stretched too long, the wind whispered in voices too low to understand. He quickened his pace. The hut came into view, a crooked thing made of gnarled wood and stone. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the scent of herbs and something else, something acrid. Gunnar's skin prickled. Before he could knock, the door swung open. Grelda stood in the doorway, her sharp eyes glinting beneath her tangled white hair. She was shorter than most dwarfs, hunched with age but far from frail. Her fingers, long and knotted like tree roots, clutched a wooden staff. "I was expecting you," she said, voice like dry leaves. Gunnar scowled. "Then you know what I've come for." The witch nodded. Her gaze flickered to Elira, and something unreadable passed across her face. She stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the air was thick with the scent of burning sage and something metallic. Jars lined the walls, filled with ingredients Gunnar dared not name. A single candle flickered on the table, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Grelda gestured to a chair. "Put the girl down." Gunnar hesitated before laying Elira onto a woolen blanket spread over the seat. The child stirred but did not wake. Grelda studied her, fingers hovering just above her forehead. The darkness has marked her. Gunnar's fists clenched. What does that mean? Grelda met his eyes. She is tied to whatever lurks in the void. If we do nothing, they will come again. Next time, they will take her. A cold weight settled in his stomach. Then how do we stop them? The witch exhaled, stepping away from the girl. She turned to a shelf, plucking an ancient tome bound in cracked leather. Flipping through the brittle pages, she muttered under her breath. There is a way, she said finally. But it is dangerous. You must journey into the dark world, the realm beyond the veil. Gunnar stiffened. He had heard the legends, the stories told to frighten dwarven children into obedience. The dark world, a realm of twisted horrors, where time and space unraveled. No one who entered ever returned. You expect me to go into that accursed place? He asked. Grelda's gaze was steady. It is the only way. If you do not go, the girl will be lost. Gunnar looked at Elira, her small chest rising and falling with each fragile breath. He thought of her father, of the village, of the fear that had gripped Ironvale tonight. He had never been one to shy away from a fight, but this was different. And yet, there was no choice. He exhaled sharply. What must I do? Grelda handed him a small vial filled with a shimmering liquid. Drink this when you reach the old well outside the village. It will open the path. Gunnar took it, gripping it tight. And what awaits me on the other side? The witch smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Monsters, Gunnar Stonefoot. Monsters, and worse. The well stood at the edge of Ironvale, abandoned for years. Its stones were slick with moss, the mouth yawning open like the throat of some ancient beast. Gunnar stared down into its depths, vial in hand. The village lay behind him, silent. He raised the vial to his lips and drank. The world tilted. The stars overhead spun wildly, the ground dissolving beneath his feet. A great rushing sound filled his ears, like 1,000 voices speaking at once. The darkness swallowed him whole. And Gunnar fell. The fall seemed endless. Gunnar Stonefoot tumbled through a void of swirling shadows, his stomach twisting as the darkness pulled at him like unseen fingers. The wind screamed in his ears, though he wasn't sure if it was wind at all. Just when he feared he would plummet forever, the world around him shifted. He landed hard on cold, damp ground, the breath knocked from his lungs. Gasping, he pushed himself up and looked around. A dense fog clung to the ground, twisting into eerie shapes before vanishing into the abyss beyond. The sky, or what should have been the sky, was a swirling mess of black and violet, streaked with pulses of sickly green lightning. This was the dark world. Gunnar gritted his teeth. The weight of his axe across his back was reassuring, though he had no idea if steel could cut what lurked in this forsaken place. He had a mission. He had to find whatever entity had marked Elira and stop it before it came for her again. A guttural growl echoed from the mist. Gunnar turned sharply, gripping the hilt of his axe. From the darkness, a shape emerged. It was massive, its body shifting unnaturally as if it were smoke given form. Its eyes burned with a crimson glow, and when it opened its jagged maw, the sound of 100 whispers filled the air. He had little time to react. The creature lunged. Rolling to the side, Gunnar swung his axe in a wide arc. The blade connected with resistance, as if striking against water and stone simultaneously. The creature shrieked, recoiling, and for the first time, he saw something shift within its form, a dark core, pulsing like a diseased heart. A weakness. The creature lashed out, and Gunnar barely managed to dodge its shadowy claws. His instincts took over. He feinted left, then brought his axe down hard, aiming for the pulsing core. The blade bit deep, and the entity shrieked, its form unraveling in a whirlwind of inky darkness. Within seconds, it was gone. Panting, Gunnar steadied himself. That had been a guardian, one of many, if the stories were true. He wasn't just in enemy territory. He was in a world built to consume intruders. He pressed on. The landscape twisted as he walked, shifting from jagged rock to gnarled trees that bled a thick, black sap. Whispers clawed at his ears, calling his name in voices he didn't recognize. The deeper he went, the heavier the air became, pressing against his chest like a great unseen weight. Then he saw it. A tower loomed in the distance, impossibly tall, its spire vanishing into the swirling sky. At its base, a gaping doorway pulsed with the same sickly energy he had seen in the portal back in Ironvale. This was it. The source. As he approached, the shadows thickened. Figures began to emerge, dozens of them, their forms shifting like living smoke. Eyes like burning coals fixated on him, and as one, they moved. Gunnar gripped his axe. There was no turning back. The first creature lunged, and he met it with steel. His blade sliced through the darkness, the impact sending shudders through his arms. But for every creature he struck down, more took its place, their whispers merging into a cacophony of agony and rage. He fought his way forward, his body growing weary with each swing. Just as despair began to claw at him, the ground trembled. A deep, rumbling voice echoed through the air. Enough. The creatures halted, their forms dissolving like mist. From the darkness within the tower, something stirred. A figure emerged tall, draped in flowing robes of midnight, its face obscured beneath a hood. But its presence was undeniable. It was the one who had marked Elira. The one who had called her. Gunnar tightened his grip on his axe, his muscles coiled. He was here to end this. The figure lifted a hand, and the darkness around them writhed. You do not belong here, dwarf. Gunnar scowled. Neither does the girl you tried to take. The figure chuckled, the sound like dead leaves rustling in the wind. Ah, but she was chosen. The mark cannot be erased. Gunnar's jaw clenched. We'll see about that. With a battle cry, he charged. The fight for Elira's soul had begun. The air crackled with dark energy as Gunnar's charge carried him forward, his axe gripped tight in both hands. The robed figure did not move, but the very shadows of the dark world twisted in response to its presence. As he closed the distance, the ground beneath him shifted, warping into a mass of writhing black tendrils. Gunnar leapt, barely avoiding being ensnared, and swung his axe in a downward arc. The blade met nothing but air. The figure had vanished. A whisper brushed against his ear. Foolish dwarf. You do not know what you fight. Gunnar spun, instinct screaming, just as something massive slammed into him. He crashed against the ground, the impact rattling his bones. Darkness coiled around him, constricting, suffocating. He fought back, muscles straining against the unnatural force. His axe remained in his grasp, though his fingers numbed from the cold radiating through the shadow's grip. Gritting his teeth, he channeled every ounce of strength he had left and wrenched his arm free. With a feral growl, he brought the axe up, slashing through the darkness. A shriek echoed through the void. The shadowy tendrils recoiled, and Gunnar staggered to his feet, gasping for breath. The robed figure stood a few paces away, untouched. Its hood remained drawn, but from within, two glowing white eyes burned with an unnatural light. This is not your fight, the entity intoned. Leave, and you may yet live. Gunnar wiped blood from his lip and spat onto the ground. Not a chance. The figure sighed. The air between them shimmered, and then, suddenly, it was moving, fast, impossibly fast. Gunnar barely raised his axe in time to block a strike that sent a wave of force rippling outward. He stumbled back, regaining his stance as the figure loomed closer. A second attack came, then a third. Gunnar dodged and parried, but each blow carried the weight of something beyond mortal strength. The shadows around them thickened, swirling like a living storm. Lightning, black and violet, crackled above, illuminating the battlefield in sharp flashes. Gunnar's chest heaved. His arms ached from deflecting each strike. But he could not afford to falter. Elira's fate, and perhaps the fate of Ironvale itself, hung on his victory. His eyes flickered to the figure's center. Beneath the flowing robes, the dark core pulsed, similar to the guardian he had slain earlier. A weakness. He had to exploit it. Summoning the last reserves of his strength, Gunnar feigned a misstep, letting his axe dip lower than before. The figure took the bait, lunging forward, its shadowy form reaching for him. In that instant, he twisted his body, swinging the axe with all his might. The blade connected. A deafening howl ripped through the air. The robed figure staggered, clutching its wound. The darkness surrounding them convulsed, shifting violently. The sky above cracked open, revealing glimpses of a void beyond even this forsaken place. Gunnar pressed the attack. He swung again, this time aiming directly for the pulsing core. The figure raised a hand, summoning a shield of pure shadow, but it was weaker now. Desperate. With a final battle cry, Gunnar drove his axe through the barrier, through the figure's chest, cleaving the core in two. A burst of energy erupted outward, flinging him backward. The world trembled. The shadows screamed. The robed figure let out a final, choked gasp before its form dissolved into nothingness. Silence. Gunnar lay on the ground, panting. The darkness around him no longer felt oppressive, it was thinning, dissipating like morning mist. The air was lighter, the whispers fading into oblivion. He had won. But he was not done. Staggering to his feet, he turned toward the looming tower. The fight had weakened him, but Elira was still somewhere within. And now, nothing stood between him and her rescue. Bracing himself, Gunnar stepped forward, ready to face whatever lay beyond the final door. Gunnar pushed through the final threshold of the dark tower, his weary legs carrying him forward despite the battle he had just endured. The air within was heavy, charged with an eerie energy that made his beard bristle. The chamber stretched endlessly, its blackened walls pulsing like the inside of a great, slumbering beast. At the very heart of it, Elira floated within a cocoon of shifting shadows, her small frame limp, her red curls dull and lifeless. The dwarf gritted his teeth and gripped his axe. He had not fought through the dark world, faced horrors beyond comprehension, only to fail now. He stepped forward, but as he did, the remaining shadows coalesced, forming a final guardian, an enormous, horned spectre, its eyes hollow voids, its voice a low, rumbling echo of lost souls. "She is ours," it intoned. "You cannot take what has been claimed." Gunnar rolled his shoulders, raising his axe. I can. And I will." The spectre lunged, its clawed hands swiping at him with a force that cracked the very air. Gunnar dodged, barely, feeling the wind of its strike whip past his cheek. He ducked, pivoted, and swung his axe. The blade met its shadowed form, and though it did not cleave through, it disrupted the darkness, making the entity stagger. He saw his opportunity. Drawing upon the last reserves of his strength, Gunnar leapt, driving his axe into the spectre's chest. A blinding light erupted from the impact, and the creature let out a deafening wail. The darkness around Elira's cocoon trembled, the tower shuddering as if it were coming undone. With a final roar, the spectre dissolved into nothingness. The cocoon shattered. Elira's body fell. Gunnar dropped his axe and caught her just before she hit the cold stone. She was so small in his arms, so fragile. For a terrifying moment, she did not stir. But then, her eyes fluttered open, those bright green orbs full of confusion and fear. "Gunnar," she whispered. Relief crashed over him like a tidal wave. "Aye, lass. I've got ye." The dark world trembled. The very fabric of the place was unraveling, the sky above splintering like cracked glass. The magic that had sustained this realm was breaking apart, its master defeated, its purpose undone. "Hold tight," he told Elira. "We're leaving." A great force pulled at them, dragging them upward. The shadows collapsed inward, the tower crumbling beneath them. Light real, pure light, pierced through the darkness, and then, with a great rush, they were flung through the void. And then, they landed. Gunnar found himself lying on the cold stone of Ironvale's village square, Elira safely cradled in his arms. Around them, dwarfs gasped in shock, rushing forward. The stars shone overhead, and the weight of the dark world was gone. Balgrin, the village elder, knelt beside them, his face lined with wonder. "You returned," he murmured. "And the girl?" Gunnar sat up, still holding Elira close. "She's safe." The cheers that erupted around them were deafening. Fires were relit, voices raised in joy, but Gunnar barely heard them. He looked down at Elira, who clung to his tunic, eyes wide with gratitude. "Ye fought for me," she whispered. Gunnar ruffled her hair gently. "Of course, lass." Balgrin helped him to his feet. "The darkness is gone. You have done what no other could." Gunnar exhaled deeply, exhaustion setting in. "Aye," he said. "But I didn't do it alone." He glanced at the stars, wondering if the spirits of the fallen, those lost to the dark world, had found peace at last. Elira's tiny hand tightened around his. "Thank you, Gunnar." He smiled down at her, and for the first time in a long while, he felt truly at home. In the days that followed, Ironvale began to heal. The fear that had gripped the village was replaced with warmth and celebration. Though some wounds lingered, the people knew they had been spared a terrible fate. Gunnar, for his part, returned to his forge, his hammer ringing against steel once more. But the nightmares of the dark world never came. He had faced them, conquered them, and left them behind. Elira, now forever changed by the experience, grew stronger. She trained under Balgrin's wisdom, learning the ways of protection and resilience. She would never be powerless again. And so, the story of the dwarf who braved the dark world to save a child became legend. It was a tale whispered by firelight, a lesson passed from generation to generation. Strength is not just in steel, nor in muscle, nor even in magic. Strength is in the heart, in the courage to stand against the dark, even when all seems lost. And sometimes, all it takes is one stubborn dwarf to remind the world of that truth.